The dazzling bioluminescent flora of Xylos painted the night sky in hues of cerulean and emerald as they swayed gently in the warm breeze. In the small settlement nestled between ancient crystal trees, the Xylorian people went about their evening rituals, their jade-colored skin shifting subtly with their emotions as they communed with the living world around them. Lyra stood at the edge of the village, her skin a bright turquoise that betrayed her excitement despite her attempts to appear calm. Unlike most of her kin, whose skin remained a steady jade when in the presence of the elders, Lyra's epidermis practically shouted her emotions to anyone who cared to look. This trait had earned her the gentle teasing of her peers and the concerned frowns of the elders, particularly Elder Ilera, who now fixed her with a stern gaze. "The sacred laws exist for our protection, young one," Elder Ilera said, her own skin a deep, stable emerald that spoke of centuries of practiced control. "The forbidden forest harbors ancient dangers, and should creatures from the stars ever breach our atmosphere again, you are to report it immediately, not investigate on your own." Lyra lowered her gaze respectfully, though the stubborn turquoise of her skin didn't fade. "Yes, Elder, I understand the importance of our traditions." Elder Ilera's expression softened slightly. "You have exceptional healing talents, Lyra. The plants speak to you, as they do to few others. But talent without wisdom is like a river flow without banks. Powerful, yet dangerous." Lyra nodded, suppressing a sigh she'd exhaled countless times before. As the elder departed to prepare for the evening communal meditation, Lyra's gaze drifted beyond the crystalline trees that marked the boundary of their settlement, toward the forbidden forest that had called to her since childhood. The night deepened, and Lyra found herself unable to sleep, her thoughts racing with the ancient stories of visitors from beyond the stars. The Xylorians had encountered other species centuries ago, but contact had been limited and eventually forbidden after conflicts arose. Now, most of her people lived in isolation, content with their harmony with Xylos itself. A sudden flash of light tore through her thoughts, followed by a roaring sound that seemed to split the sky. Lyra bolted upright in her dwelling, her skin pulsing with alarmed yellows and shocked whites as she watched a fiery object tear through the night sky, trailing smoke and debris as it plummeted toward the forbidden forest. The impact shook the ground beneath her feet. Around her, the village stirred, alarmed voices calling out as people emerged from their dwellings. The elders were already moving, organizing groups to ensure village safety. But Lyra's mind was made up in an instant. While the others gathered at the village center, she slipped away, her medicinal pouch hastily filled with healing herbs and salves. If something or someone had survived that crash, they might need help. And despite all her training to follow tradition, the healer in her couldn't ignore a potential cry for aid. The Forbidden Forest lived up to its name. Unlike the harmonious, welcoming flora near the village, these plants were ancient, suspicious of intrusion. Some reached out with thorny tendrils as Lyra passed, forcing her to communicate calming intentions through gentle touches and whispered words in the old Xylorian tongue. Her skin shifted to a deep, gentle blue as she focused on projecting peaceful energy to the sentient flora. The crash site wasn't difficult to find. A swath of destruction cut through the forest, trees splintered and vegetation smoldering. At the end of this path sat a metallic structure, once sleek and purposeful, now crumpled and broken. Smoke poured from ruptures in its hull, and sparks jumped between exposed components. Lyra approached cautiously, her skin shifting between fascinated turquoise and cautious amber. The vessel was unlike anything in the stories, smaller than she'd imagined interstellar craft to be, perhaps designed for a single occupant or a small crew. A groaning sound from within the wreckage spurred her into action. Someone was alive in there. After several tense minutes of carefully navigating the twisted metal, Lyra found him, a being unlike any she'd seen before. His skin was a pale, pinkish-beige color, without the chromatic shifts of her people. Dark crimson fluid, blood, she assumed, leaked from several wounds on his form. He wore a tight-fitting garment made of unknown materials, now torn and singed in several places. Lyra's healer instincts took over. She examined him quickly, noting that while his physiology was alien to her, the basic principles seemed similar enough. He had a head, torso, 2 arms, and 2 legs, arranged much like her own people. His face bore no tentacles or extrasensory organs, just 2 closed eyes, a prominent nose, and a mouth. He was unconscious but breathing, his chest rising and falling in shallow movements. Applying pressure to stop the bleeding from a gash on his arm, Lyra used her free hand to retrieve a healing paste from her pouch, a mixture of local fungi and crystal tree sap that accelerated healing in Xylorian tissue. She hoped it would work similarly for this stranger. As she applied the salve to his more accessible wounds, Lyra noticed that a section of his lower garment was torn, revealing what appeared to be a serious swelling between his legs. Concerned about internal injuries, she gently examined the area, surprised to find a strange appendage unlike anything in Xylorian anatomy. It seemed swollen and distended, possibly indicating trauma. Following her healer's training, Lyra applied a cooling leaf extract to what she assumed was an injury, gently massaging the medicine into the area as she would for any Xylorian swelling. To her alarm, the appendage seemed to react, becoming even more enlarged and rigid. The stranger's breathing quickened, and he made a soft, moaning sound. Lyra pulled her hand back quickly, her skin flashing alarmed yellows. Had she made his injury worse? The stranger stirred slightly, but didn't regain consciousness. Confused and worried, she decided to focus on his other wounds first, wrapping them with healing leaves that would stem bleeding and fight infection. Once she had stabilized his most obvious injuries, Lyra faced a dilemma. She couldn't leave him here, exposed to the elements and the more dangerous flora of the Forbidden Forest. But taking him back to the village would mean violating sacred law and facing the judgment of the elders. They might refuse to help an off-worlder, or worse, see him as a threat to be eliminated. Decision made. Lyra carefully constructed a simple travois from fallen branches in her outer garment. With considerable effort, she managed to move the stranger onto it. He was heavier than a Xylorian of similar size would be, and Lyra wondered about the density of his bones and muscles. As she began the difficult task of dragging him through the forest, she noticed the strange swelling between his legs had somewhat subsided, which she took as a positive sign. Instead of heading back to the village, Lyra made for her secret place, a small cave behind a waterfall where she often went to experiment with healing herbs away from the judgmental eyes of the elders. It wasn't much, but it was dry, hidden, and stocked with basic supplies and medicinal plants. By the time they reached the cave, the first light of dawn was filtering through the forest canopy. The exertion had turned Lyra's skin a deep, exhausted purple, but she didn't allow herself to rest yet. She made the stranger as comfortable as possible on a bed of soft moss, covered him with a blanket woven from luminous fibers, and settled into wait. Whoever this being was, Lyra had committed herself to his care. And perhaps, once he awakened, she might finally learn something of the stars beyond Xylos, the star she had always yearned to understand. The hours passed slowly as Lyra tended to the unconscious stranger. She monitored his breathing, changed the healing leaf wraps on his wounds, and kept the cave illuminated with bioluminescent fungi she had cultivated. Outside, the forest had calmed, though she occasionally heard the distant sounds of what might be search parties from her village. When the stranger finally stirred, it happened suddenly. His eyes snapped open. They were a striking blue, unlike the solid amber eyes of her people, and he immediately tried to sit up, then fell back with a groan of pain. Lyra's skin flashed with startled whites and yellows before she could control her reaction. She raised her hands in what she hoped was a universal gesture of peace. The stranger's eyes widened in shock as he registered her appearance. He scrambled backward despite his injuries, reaching instinctively for something at his hip that wasn't there. His mouth opened, and sounds emerged, structured and patterned, clearly language, but utterly foreign to Lyra's ears. "I won't harm you," Lyra said in her own tongue, keeping her voice soft and her movements slow. Her skin shifted to a calming blue. "I found you in your crashed vessel and brought you here to heal." The man watched her with a mixture of fear and fascination, his gaze darting between her face and her color-shifting skin. He spoke again, tapping his chest. "Rorik," he said, the word clear amid the stream of incomprehensible sounds. Lyra understood. She placed a hand on her own chest. "Lyra," she replied. This small connection seemed to ease some of the tension. The stranger, Rorik, nodded slowly, then winced and clutched at his side where a particularly nasty gash had been bandaged with healing leaves. Lyra gestured to his wounds and then to her medicinal pouch, tried to communicate that she was helping him. Rorik seemed to understand, giving a cautious nod as he examined the unfamiliar. Vegetation wrapped around his injuries. Taking this as permission, Lyra approached and began checking his bandages. As she worked, Rorik's initial fear seemed to subside, replaced by pained curiosity. He watched her intently, occasionally glancing around the cave, perhaps assessing his situation. When Lyra reached to check the mysterious swelling she had noticed earlier, Rorik's reaction was immediate and dramatic. He jerked away, his face flushing a deep red as he quickly covered the area with his hands, shaking his head vehemently and speaking rapid words she couldn't understand. Lyra's skin pulsed with embarrassed violet. Clearly, this area was sensitive or private in some way she didn't comprehend. She backed away slightly, making apologetic gestures. Rorik's expression softened at her obvious embarrassment. After a moment of awkward silence, he tapped his wrist, where Lyra noticed a damaged device. He pressed several controls, and the device projected a small, flickering hologram. A crude stick figure walking, then falling, then being helped up by another figure. Lyra nodded eagerly, understanding his message of thanks. She pointed to the device, fascinated by the technology. Rorik seemed to understand her interest. He manipulated the damaged device again, and it projected another image, a simplified galactic map with one point highlighted. He pointed to this spot, then gestured around him with a questioning look. "Xylos," Lyra said, understanding he wanted to know where he was. She touched the hologram, then swept her arm to indicate the world around them. Rorik nodded, then manipulated the device again. This time, it showed another point on the map, along with simplified images of what appeared to be heavily armed insectoid creatures. His expression darkened as he pointed to these images, then made a cutting motion across his throat, a gesture that needed no translation. Lyra understood with growing alarm. Rorik wasn't just a lost traveler. He was fleeing from something dangerous. She pointed to the threatening images, her skin darkening with concern. "They follow you?" she asked, miming pursuit with her fingers. Rorik nodded grimly. He tapped another section of his device, which projected an image of a small, glowing artifact. He reached into a concealed pocket in his torn garment and carefully withdrew an actual object that matched the hologram. A crystalline structure that pulsed with an inner light, unlike anything Lyra had seen before. The moment the object was revealed, Lyra felt a strange resonance, as if the plants around them were responding to its presence. Even her own skin seemed to shimmer in unfamiliar patterns. Clearly, this was what Rorik's pursuers wanted. Their rudimentary communication was interrupted by a distant sound that made Rorik tense immediately, a high-pitched, whining noise coming from somewhere above the forest. His expression transformed to one of fear and urgency. He struggled to his feet despite his injuries, grabbing Lyra's arm and pointing upward with clear alarm. The hunt had already begun. Over the next several days, Lyra and Rorik developed a rudimentary form of communication, combining gestures, drawings etched into the soft earth of the cave floor, and the limited translations Rorik's damaged wrist device could provide. Through this painstaking process, Lyra began to understand the dire situation they faced. Rorik was a soldier, a scout for something called the Galactic Cooperative, a loose alliance of civilized worlds. He had been on a mission to investigate rumors of the Cathar Dominion, the insectoid species from the hologram, establishing a presence in this previously undisturbed sector of space. During his reconnaissance, he discovered something the Kthar were searching for on an abandoned outpost, the crystalline object he now carried. The object, which Rorik's device translated as energy source relic, was clearly more significant than its small size suggested. The Kthar had detected his theft and pursued him relentlessly, damaging his scout ship and forcing him to make an emergency landing on the nearest habitable world, Xylos. Lyra realized with growing alarm that she hadn't just aided a wounded traveler. She'd potentially brought the attention of a dangerous, expansionist species to her homeworld. "My people," Lyra tried to convey her concern, pointing toward the direction of her village, then to the sky where the Kthar's ships might appear. Rorik seemed to understand. He shook his head grimly and tapped his device, which displayed a simplified timeline. The message was clear. The Kthar likely thought he'd died in the crash. They would search the area, but their main focus would be recovering the relic. If they found no trace of it, they might leave for now. Their immediate priority was avoiding detection. They remained hidden in the cave during daylight hours, emerging only after dark when Lyra would gather food and medicinal plants to treat Rorik's healing wounds. As the days passed, Rorik regained his strength. The healing properties of Xylosian flora proved remarkably effective on his alien physiology, though Lyra noticed he avoided mentioning the swelling incident. His wrist device gradually repaired some of its basic functions, improving their ability to communicate, though many concepts remained frustratingly untranslatable. During one evening forage, Lyra returned to find Rorik examining her collection of healing plants with great interest. When she entered, he pointed to several specimens and then to his wounds, which were healing far faster than he'd apparently expected. These plants, his device translated haltingly. Special, not known to, cooperative. He tapped his chest with evident respect. "You, healer. Good." Lyra's skin flushed with pleased turquoise at the compliment. She sat beside him and began explaining, through gestures and simple words, the properties of each plant. Though much was lost in translation, Rorik seemed genuinely fascinated by her knowledge. As they worked together, their hands occasionally brushed, causing a strange flutter in Lyra's chest. She noticed that Rorik's pupils dilated slightly when this happened, and his breathing pattern changed subtly. These reactions intrigued her medical mind, but they also awakened something else, a curiosity that went beyond healing. Their growing connection was interrupted when Rorik's device suddenly emitted a series of urgent beeps. His expression turned grave as he checked it. Through laborious translation, he explained that a Kthar patrol drone had been detected nearby. They were systematically searching the forest. Lyra's skin paled to a worried gray. She knew the Forbidden Forest better than most Xylorians, but even she didn't know all its dangers. If the Kthar sent ground troops, they might trigger defenses from the ancient flora that could cause devastating chain reactions throughout the ecosystem. After much difficult communication, they agreed on a plan. They couldn't stay in the cave indefinitely, and Rorik needed access to more advanced technology to repair his communication system and contact his people. Lyra recalled ancient stories of a reclusive elder called the Keeper of Memories who lived deep in the uncharted regions of Xylos. Legend said this individual possessed knowledge of the stars and the times before isolation. It was a desperate gamble, but if anyone might know how to help them with the relic and the Kthar threat, it would be the Keeper. That night, they packed what supplies they could carry. Lyra filled pouches with healing plants and food, while Rorik salvaged useful components from his wrecked vessel, which they cautiously visited under cover of darkness. As dawn approached, they set off into the deepest parts of the Forbidden Forest, regions where even Lyra had never ventured. The journey proved even more challenging than anticipated. The ancient flora grew more sentient and territorial the deeper they traveled, requiring constant negotiation from Lyra. She communicated with the plants through touch and soft Xylorian chants, persuading them to allow safe passage. Rorik watched in undisguised amazement as venomous vines retracted and carnivorous blossoms closed at Lyra's gentle coaxing. "Your people," his device translated as he gestured to her, communicating with a particularly ancient tree. "One with forest?" Lyra nodded, trying to explain through gestures that Xylorians had evolved alongside the flora of Xylos, developing a symbiotic relationship over millennia. The plants recognized them as part of the same ecosystem, not as threats. "My world," Rorik responded, his expression turning distant. "Concrete. Metal. Few plants." He made expansive gestures, trying to convey the scale of artificial structures. Lyra tried to imagine such a place, so different from the living, breathing world she knew. The concept was almost incomprehensible, a world shaped primarily by its inhabitants rather than growing organically alongside them. Their philosophical exchange was cut short by a distant mechanical whirring. They froze, then quickly took cover beneath the massive leaves of a protective fern species. Above the canopy, a Cthar drone passed, its sensors sweeping the area. Once the immediate danger passed, they continued with greater caution, traveling only when necessary and hiding frequently. The journey that might have taken 3 days stretched into 5 as they navigated not only the forest's natural challenges, but also the increasing Cthar presence. During one rest period, sheltered in the hollow of a massive ancient tree, Rorik's wrist device managed to intercept Cthar communications. Though the translation was fragmented, the message was clear. The Cthar had deployed ground troops and were expanding their search grid. Worse, they seemed to have detected unusual energy signatures from the relic, narrowing their search area. That night, as they huddled together for warmth, the air between them seemed charged with unspoken tension. Rorik's proximity sent an unfamiliar but not unpleasant sensation across Lyra's skin, causing it to shimmer with patterns she'd never displayed before. She noticed Rorik watching the display with fascination. "Beautiful," his device translated as he carefully touched a finger to her arm, tracking the ripple of colors that followed his touch. Lyra's skin flushed with emotional turquoise tinged with a new, deeper blue she'd never manifested before. The sensation of his touch lingered even after he withdrew his hand. The moment was broken by the distant sound of crashing vegetation, something large moving through the forest with no regard for the living things it destroyed. They exchanged alarmed glances. Only something completely foreign to Xylos would move through the forbidden forest so destructively. They extinguished their small light source and remained perfectly still, listening as the sounds grew closer. Through gaps in the tree's bark, they caught glimpses of armored figures moving with mechanical precision, cutting through vegetation with energy weapons. The Cthar ground patrol had arrived faster than expected. Rorik tensed beside her, his hand moving instinctively to the energy weapon he'd salvaged from his crash. Lyra placed a restraining hand on his arm, shaking her head urgently. Fighting would only reveal their position and bring more Cthar. Instead, she closed her eyes and placed her palms against the inner surface of the ancient tree harboring them. Through focused thought and the old Xylorian communion chants whispered under her breath, she communicated their danger to the tree and, through it, to the surrounding forest. At first, nothing happened. Then, subtly at first, but with growing intensity, the forest began to respond. Bioluminescent fungi dimmed their glow, plunging areas into darkness. Certain vines retracted, creating false paths, while others descended to obscure, genuine trails. Nocturnal scout insects, symbiotic partners to many plant species, emerged in swarms, confusing electronic sensors. The Cthar patrol's movements became more chaotic as their orderly search pattern was disrupted by the forest itself. Eventually, their mechanical voices communicated something that sounded like retreat orders, and they moved away, though Lyra and Rorik remained hidden for hours afterward to be certain. "You commanded forest?" Rorik asked when they finally dared to speak again, his expression filled with wonder. Lyra shook her head, trying to explain that she hadn't commanded but requested, communicating their shared danger to the ancient tree, which had then communicated with its own network. The forest protected itself. She had merely made them part of that protection. Rorik's admiration was evident even without translation. He studied her with new eyes, seeing not just the alien being who had rescued him, but someone with profound connection to powers he could barely comprehend. As dawn approached, they continued their journey with renewed urgency. The Cthar would adapt their tactics now that they understood the forest's unusual properties. Their window of opportunity was closing. On the seventh day, as they crossed a particularly treacherous ravine on a bridge formed by the intertwined branches of ancient trees, disaster struck. A Cthar drone appeared suddenly from below, rising through a gap in the canopy. Before they could hide, its sensors locked onto them, and it emitted a shrill alert signal. Rorik reacted instantly, firing his salvaged weapon. The drone exploded, but the damage was done. Its alert had been transmitted. Within minutes, they heard the sounds of approaching Cthar ground forces. "Run!" Rorik shouted, grabbing Lyra's hand as they sprinted across the living bridge. The forest ahead began to change subtly. The vegetation took on new patterns, with crystalline formations integrated into the biological structures. Bioluminescence shifted from the usual blues and greens to include purples and silvers. They had reached the border of a region Lyra had only heard about in legends, the sacred grove, said to be where the keeper of memories dwelled. As Cthar forces closed in behind them, Lyra and Rorik plunged into this new territory. The moment they crossed the threshold, they felt a change in the air, a humming vibration that seemed to resonate with the relic in Rorik's pocket. The crystalline object began to pulse more brightly, as if responding to its surroundings. They pushed forward, following the increasing resonance, while behind them came the sounds of Cthar troops attempting to breach the grove's perimeter, with significantly more resistance from the plant life than they had encountered before. The path led them to a clearing dominated by an enormous crystal-infused tree unlike any Lyra had seen. Its trunk spiraled upward, branches forming complex, geometric patterns against the sky, while its roots created a network of chambers partially visible through translucent sections. As they approached, the relic pulsed with increasing intensity, and the tree seemed to respond, emitting answering pulses of light that flowed through its crystalline components. "We found it," Lyra whispered, her skin shifting to awestruck silver. "The Keeper's Sanctuary." Before Rorik could respond, a section of the trunk parted like a curtain, revealing an entrance. With the sounds of Cthar weapons discharging in the distance, they had no choice but to enter. Inside, the chamber was larger than seemed possible, lit by the soft glow of crystal formations that grew alongside living tissue in perfect symbiosis. At the center stood a figure that caused both of them to stop in surprise. The being before them appeared Xylorian in basic form, but ancient beyond reckoning. Their skin no longer shifted colors but maintained a constant, deep silver tone that seemed almost metallic. Where eyes would be, two crystalline orbs gleamed with inner light. They wore simple robes adorned with patterns that seemed to shift and change when viewed directly. "I am Zephyr," the being spoke, their voice resonating strangely, as if coming from the entire chamber rather than a single throat. "I have awaited your arrival, Lyra of the healing hands, and Rorik, bearer of the seed." Both Lyra and Rorik froze in shock. Not only did this ancient being know their names, but they had spoken in perfectly understandable language to both of them simultaneously. "Ow!" Rorik began, but was interrupted by the sound of Cthar weapons impacting the exterior of the tree. "Time grows short," Zephyr said, gesturing for them to come closer. "The Cthar Dominion seeks what they do not understand, what was never theirs to claim. The object you carry, Rorik, is not merely a relic or energy source, as your people named it." Rorik carefully withdrew the crystalline object, which now pulsed with blinding intensity. "It is a cosmic bioseed," Zephyr continued, "one of many scattered throughout the galaxies eons ago. They remain dormant until they encounter the correct resonant frequencies, those created when two different species form a bond of profound understanding and connection." Lyra and Rorik exchanged glances, both recalling their growing closeness over the past days. "The Xylorians were once the appointed guardians of this seed," Zephyr explained, "before fear led them to isolation. The Cthar seek these seeds not to activate them, but to prevent their activation, for when awakened, a bioseed creates harmony and accelerated evolution, concepts anathema to their dominion of conquest. A massive explosion shook the chamber. The Kthar were breaking through. "We don't have weapons to fight them," Rorik said urgently. "My ship's communicator was destroyed. We can't call for help. Conventional weapons will not save us," Zephyr replied calmly. "But the seed can, if properly awakened." "Tell us how," Lyra insisted, her skin pulsing with determined green. Zephyr's crystalline eyes seemed to look through them rather than at them. "The seed responds to bioresonance, the harmonic vibration created when two biologically different beings with genuine emotional connection share life energy. In ancient times, this was called the convergence." Another explosion rocked the chamber, closer this time. Parts of the crystalline ceiling began to crack. "How exactly do we create this bioresonance?" Rorik asked, his expression a mixture of determination and confusion. Zephyr approached them, placing one hand on each of their heads. As they touched, Lyra and Rorik experienced a rush of shared sensation, memories, feelings, and understanding flowing between them. In those moments, Lyra understood the true nature of Rorik's anatomy, including the swelling she had mistakenly treated as an injury. Simultaneously, Rorik comprehended the complex symbiotic relationship between Xylorians and their world, including how their skin colors reflected their emotional states. Both of them also understood, with sudden clarity, what the convergence would require: a physical and emotional union of a profoundly intimate nature. As Zephyr removed their hands, Lyra and Rorik stared at each other with new awareness, their faces flushing with respective turquoise and pink. "The choice must be freely made by both," Zephyr said softly. "The seed cannot be awakened through coercion or necessity alone. True connection is required." The wall of the chamber burst inward as a Kthar breaching charge detonated. Through the smoke came armored figures, their insectoid features visible behind transparent helmets. They carried weapons unlike anything Lyra had seen, and at their head strode a larger figure adorned with additional armor plating, a commander. "Surrender the seed," the Kthar commander's mechanical translator demanded. "Resistances, biological inefficiency." Rorik stepped forward, placing himself between the Kthar and Lyra. "You'll never have it, Zorgan," he growled, apparently recognizing the commander. The human scout, Zorgan's translator, rendered his clicking speech. "Your persistence is noted but futile. The Dominion claims the seed by right of superior force." Zephyr moved with surprising speed for one who appeared so ancient, placing themselves between the two groups. "This sanctuary is protected by powers beyond your understanding, Kthar. Leave now." In response, Zorgan fired his weapon. The energy blast struck Zephyr directly, but instead of causing harm, it seemed to be absorbed into their silver skin, then channeled into the crystal structures of the chamber. The redirected energy caused several Kthar soldiers to fall back, temporarily stunned. "Your resistance is anticipated," Zorgan stated coldly. Adaptation protocols engaged. The remaining Kthar soldiers spread out, firing specialized weapons that began to dissolve the crystal structures rather than shatter them. Zephyr visibly weakened as the chamber started to destabilize. "The sanctuary cannot withstand their dissolution weapons for long," Zephyr gasped, turning to Lyra and Rorik. "You must decide now." A blast caught Rorik in the shoulder, spinning him around. Lyra caught him as he fell, her hands instinctively moving to the wound, applying pressure. His blood coated her fingers, and where it touched her skin, it created an unusual resonance pattern. Her skin began to glow from within rather than simply changing color. Rorik looked up at her, his eyes reflecting the glow. "I think," he said weakly, managing a smile despite the pain, "we've moved well past the awkward swelling misunderstanding." Despite everything, Lyra found herself laughing, a release of tension and acknowledgement of the absurdity of their situation. Her skin pulsed with a deep, rich blue that neither of them needed Zephyr's translation to understand. If we're going to do this, Rorik continued, his voice stronger as he clasped her hand, it shouldn't be just to activate a cosmic seed or stop the Cthar. It should be because we choose it, Lyra finished, her skin now glowing with the same certainty she felt within. As another section of the chamber collapsed, and the Cthar pressed their advantage, Zephyr created a final defensive barrier of crystalline energy around them. I can hold them back no longer than 3 minutes, the ancient guardian warned. Make your choice. In the small pocket of relative safety, as chaos erupted around them, Lyra and Rorik faced each other. No further words were needed. Their connection had grown from confusion and mistrust to respect, admiration, and finally to something deeper, something that transcended their biological differences. As they embraced, the cosmic bioseed between them began to pulse in rhythm with their heartbeats. What followed was a joining of not just bodies, but energies. Lyra's ability to channel the living essence of Xylo's and Rorik's uniquely adaptable human life force, creating a harmony neither had experienced before. The swelling that had once caused such confusion became, in this moment, a bridge between worlds, a physical manifestation of connection rather than difference. As they joined, Lyra's skin erupted in patterns never before seen in Xylorian history, radiating waves of light that synchronized with Rorik's own heightened energy. The seed responded, expanding into a sphere of pure energy that enveloped them both, then extended outward in concentric waves. The Cthar weapons failed first, then their armor systems. The insectoid invaders fell back in disarray as the wave continued to expand, passing harmlessly through the biological structures of the sanctuary while disrupting anything artificial or technologically aggressive. Zephyr stood in the epicenter of the energy storm, their silver form gradually becoming translucent as they channeled and directed the seed's awakening. "It is done," they whispered as the energy reached its peak. The guardian cycle renews. The wave expanded beyond the sanctuary, beyond the sacred grove, encompassing the entire region. In the distance, the Cthar vessels attempting to land experienced catastrophic systems failures, forcing emergency departures before they could be completely disabled. Within the sanctuary, as the energy began to stabilize, Lyra and Rorik remained in each other's arms, exhausted but alive. Around them, the damaged crystal structures were already beginning to regenerate in new patterns, incorporating aspects of both Xylorian and human cellular structures. Zephyr's form had become almost completely transparent, little more than an outline of light. "The seed has awakened," they said, their voice now barely audible. "It will protect Xylos for generations to come, creating a barrier against those who would conquer or destroy. But it requires guardians to maintain its balance." "What happens to you?" Lyra asked, reaching toward the fading figure. "I have maintained the dormant seed for millennia," Zephyr replied. "Now that it is awakened, my purpose is fulfilled. I return to the greater consciousness of Xylos. But new guardians must arise." Their gaze moved meaningfully between Lyra and Rorik. "Us?" Rorik asked, still holding Lyra close. "But I'm not from this world." "Precisely why you are suited for this task," Zephyr's fading voice explained. "The seed thrives on diversity, on union across difference. Together, you represent what the Cthar most fear, cooperation that transcends biological boundaries." With these final words, Zephyr's form dissolved completely into motes of light that spread throughout the chamber, merging with the crystal structures. Lyra and Rorik were left alone in the sanctuary, which continued to heal and restructure itself around them. Outside, the sounds of battle had ceased entirely. "Are you all right?" Rorik asked softly, examining Lyra with concern. Her skin had stabilized into a new pattern, her natural jade base now interlaced with permanent traces of bioluminescence that echoed the patterns of the activated seed. "Yes," she answered, similarly examining him. The wounds he had sustained were healing at an accelerated rate, and there was a subtle luminescence beneath his skin that hadn't been present before. "The question is, what do we do now?" The answer came sooner than expected. 3 days later, as they were learning to navigate their new connection to the awakened seed and the changes it had wrought in them both. Visitors arrived at the sanctuary. Led by Elder Alara, a delegation from Lyra's village approached cautiously. They had witnessed the wave of energy and the departure of the strange vessels from their skies. Following ancient teachings that had almost been forgotten, they had sought out the sacred grove. The meeting was tense at first. Elder Alara's skin showed shock and disapproval when she saw Lyra's transformed appearance and her obvious connection to Rorik. But as Lyra explained what had transpired, the crash, the Cathar threat, finding the Keeper, and the awakening of the seed, the Elder's colors gradually shifted from judgmental amber to thoughtful blue. The old stories speak of guardians who would bridge worlds, Elder Alara finally acknowledged. We thought them mere legends, excuses for maintaining our isolation. Perhaps we were wrong to turn so completely from the stars. In the days that followed, a cautious alliance formed. The Xylorian village sent supplies and assistance to help restore the sanctuary, which was rapidly evolving into a hybrid structure that incorporated elements of both Xylosian organics and surprisingly Earth-like features, as if the seed had accessed Rorik's genetic memory of his homeworld. 2 weeks after the confrontation with the Cathar, as Lyra and Rorik were meditating in the central chamber, learning to channel the seed's energy, a new signal activated Rorik's partially repaired wrist device. A cooperative ship, he explained with surprise after checking the communication. They received my last automated distress beacon before the crash. They're requesting landing coordinates. Lyra felt a momentary pang of uncertainty. Will you go with them? She asked, her skin betraying her anxiety despite her attempt to sound neutral. Rorik took her hand, his expression serious. Not without you, if you'd consider coming. Or, he hesitated, then continued. I could stay here. We're linked to the seed now. I'm not sure we could separate from it, even if we wanted to. The arrival of the cooperative ship opened new possibilities. Its communication systems allowed Rorik to explain the Cathar threat and the significance of the awakened seed. The ship's captain, a being from a species neither humanoid nor insectoid, but something in between, recognized the importance of what had occurred. The cooperative has legends of the bio-seeds, the captain explained through the ship's more sophisticated translation system. If one has awakened here, Xylos becomes a world of significant interest, one to be protected, not exploited. After much discussion among the Xylorian elders, Rorik, Lyra, and the cooperative representatives, a compromise was reached. The sanctuary would remain under Lyra and Rorik's guardianship, with limited, respectful contact permitted between Xylos and the wider galactic community. The cooperative would establish a discrete monitoring station in orbit to provide early warning of any Cathar return, while respecting Xylorian sovereignty. For Lyra and Rorik, the decision to remain together came naturally. Their connection, physical, emotional, and now linked through the seed's energy, had transcended their initial misunderstandings to become something neither had imagined possible. 6 months after the seed's awakening, they stood together on a newly formed crystal balcony overlooking the vastly expanded sacred grove, which now served as a buffer zone between the traditional Xylorian territories and the small cooperative outpost established at the edge of the forest. Do you ever regret it? Lyra asked, her skin shimmering with the permanent luminescence that marked her as a seed guardian. Staying here instead of returning to your world? Rorik smiled, the subtle glow beneath his own skin highlighting his features in the twilight. Not for a moment, he replied, pulling her closer. Though I do sometimes think about that first day, when you found me and tried to heal what you thought was a swelling. Lyra's skin flushed with embarrassed violet, though she laughed. In my defense, your anatomy is very strange. Yours isn't exactly standard issue either, he teased, tracing the patterns on her arm that flared brighter at his touch. But I suppose that's the point, isn't it? What the seed showed us, that our differences aren't obstacles, but opportunities. As the twin moons of Xylos rose, casting silver light across the landscape, they reflected on how far they had come from that first confused encounter. The swelling, that had once been a source of misunderstanding had ultimately led to the salvation of Xylos and the beginning of a new chapter for both their species. In the sanctuary below them, young Xylorians were already learning from cooperative teachers about the wider universe, while cooperative scientists studied the unique properties of Xylosian flora under the watchful guidance of village elders. It was a fragile balance, but one with profound promise. The Kthar will return eventually, Rorik noted, his expression turning serious. The seed's barrier won't keep them away forever, and we'll be ready when they do, Lyra replied with quiet confidence, her hand finding his. Not just us, or the Xylorians, or even the cooperative, but all of us together. That's what they truly fear, not defeat, but collaboration. The idea that strength comes not from dominion, but from connection. As if in response to her words, the seed's energy pulsed through them both, a reminder of the power they had unlocked and the responsibility they now shared. What had begun with a crash landing and a healer's confused attempt to treat a strange swelling had blossomed into something that would reshape worlds. They stayed there until deep night, watching the stars that no longer represented isolation and fear, but possibility and hope. And if sometimes they still laughed about their initial anatomical misunderstandings, it only deepened the bond between them. A reminder that even the most profound connections could begin with the most awkward of encounters.